So for the second time, hence why I am a double NPE, I found out that the man listed on my birth certificate was not my biological father.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 232. And today I'm speaking with Stacy. Hi, Stacy.
Oh, hi, Lily.
I feel so comfortable with you.
After our crossover?
Yeah, we've spent a couple hours, 1 or 2 hours
Yeah.
talking today. That was so nice.
Very nice.
So I was just recording with you for your podcast this morning. And tell us the name of your podcast.
The name of my podcast is Mothers, Lies, and DNA Surprises, really kind of focusing on those of us who've had DNA surprises who also struggle with our relationship with our mothers and kind of dive into that aspect of this journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a great time with you on your podcast this morning. So thank you for inviting me on. And we get to listen to your story today. But we have some friends in common. And I just wanted to, I feel like I haven't brought up the retreat in a while. So you and I have both been to the High Wraith Hope and Healing retreats.
Yes.
I went to the Jersey house, the Jersey Shore house. Which ones have you been to?
Well, I've been to a few. So I have been to Texas. A summer one in Texas. I've been to Arizona, a summer one in Arizona. I have done the Jersey Shore. And actually, April of this year, I did Jersey for the first time. And then I've done a fall one in Michigan. So I've done 4.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. None that you've been at, though. But yeah.
No, I'm super bummed. Like
I know.
I haven't been in years, but I still speak of it with so much warmth in my heart. I love the facilitators. It's Aaron and Cindy and who else puts them on?
And Dennis.
Dennis.
Yep.
Oh
Yeah, it's, and I think as we both are in this for, I'm on 6 years, and I think you are as well. I don't know when the right time or the wrong time would be to go to a retreat, because to me, I don't think there is. I still go. I still get something out of every single one I go to. I meet new people, reconnect with other people that I've met either in person at other retreats or in the Zooms. And, I've been in therapy for 5.5 years, and I still am learning and growing myself. And so I go and I always come out of there and just being around other people. And as you know, those retreats have adoptees, donor conceived, late discovery adoptees, and NPEs. So it's a community of very different experiences, and learn so much from each other. And there's nothing like it.
so much. I mean, that's where I really started to have so much compassion for the adoptee world, was meeting adoptees and spending days talking with them. And I'm like, wow, we have a lot in common with, especially reunion and research and finding, creating relationships with new biological family members. I get so much out of those. I want to go to another one.
Yes,
I really do.
Yes,
okay.
You should. Yes.
Do you have one on the books, did you say?
I don't. I've been looking at the ones for 2026, and I have not decided which one I can squeeze into the calendar, but I plan to go, and I look forward to it. And I'm fortunate that my husband is very supportive of me going, because it's a commitment. There's travel involved, both of us, you and I, both in Minnesota, to go to these locations and the time away and obviously the financial commitment. But to me, that money in the I think it's therapy, not even just the facilitators in the sessions that you have, which are also people who are in our community who are licensed and can connect with, but spending time with and having fun and conversations with people who get it. It's all very therapeutic.
It is. Yeah, you're right. We should mention, although it's social and loving and great food, and you get to
Mhm.
hang out with other NPs and adoptees and the like. But yeah, they have actual professional
Yep.
facilitators come in, certified throughout the day, and we work on things.
Yes.
It's everything. It's
Yep,
all
it is. It
together.
touches everything. Our artistic side, our emotional side, our growth side, and then of course they, bring in on our last full day, you can do the optional massages and Reiki and you know,
Do they still bring in
psychics. Yeah,
mediums? Do they do? Okay, that's the first time I've ever been to one. I just signed up when I was there. I was like, I don't know what this is. I'll sign up for an hour session. Wow.
definitely.
It
Yep.
was fascinating. I was trying to tell I I don't know the medium. I was trying to tell her, she was explaining the someone she was seeing, and she's like, it has a grandmotherly vibe. I'm like, well, you know why we're here. She's like, don't tell me. Don't tell me. She's like, I
Hmm.
don't want any information on why you guys are here. Because I was
Yeah.
trying to explain to her why it was a grandmotherly vibe, but not,
Give it away.
necessarily a biological grandmother.
Yeah.
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 So
And they do that every time. It's like they don't want to know what is bringing everybody together because they want it to be as respected and as authentic as it can be without feeling like we're being, you know,
Mhm.
set up for success
Yeah.
with a medium. Yeah.
Yes. And so, yes, we are both Minnesota girls. So we're having a heat wave right now. It's
I know.
34 degrees for me. How about for you?
Yeah, I think we're about the same. I'm about 3 hours north of you, but the snow got really sloppy yesterday and today it's not as sunny as it was yesterday, but I'll take these temperatures the rest of the winter if I could.
I would love it. My kids were ice fishing this weekend and it was like
Uh-huh.
negative 12 wind chill. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
kids, I was scared. I was afraid for I was like, please come in. But 34 I can handle. I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's doable for us in Minnesota in the winter. That's a heat
Yes.
wave.
I'm going to put the links for, because we've discussed High Wraith Hope and Healing retreats. I'm going to put the link for your podcast, Mother's Lies and DNA Surprises. And if anything else gets brought up, please feel free to mention it. I'll put links as well. Oh, that reminded me. Do you still moderate a Facebook group or
I
admin?
do. Yeah, I
Uh,
do. I'm one of the moderators for the Togetherness Heals NPE only group. And so I have committed to hosting at least one Zoom a month, and they have them every other Wednesday and every Saturday. And it's free for everyone. And some of the groups, there's a couple people, and other groups, other nights, it's, a dozen or more people, and whatever people need to talk about is open to do that. And again, it's one of those things that's selfishly, it's a commitment to do and to make myself available for it, but it's very therapeutic and to be there to support others who are, last month when I did it, there was somebody who had just found out, and this was their very
oh,
first Zoom. And your heart breaks for these new discovered NPEs. And it takes you back there. And I know how critical it was for me when I eventually found the Zooms to be a part of it, that it's driven me to make sure that I offer this because if it's all volunteers, and if people aren't able to do it, then those Zooms get canceled. And I think of these people who need it, and especially with holidays and everything going on, it's a great resource for NPEs. They've got one for adoptees, they've got different subgroups for people, so they're in the appropriate group. But
yeah.
the Zooms are a combination of all of those late discoveries, NPEs, donor conceived. But yeah, it's just a great support group.
How could somebody get on one of those Zoom calls? What would they have to do?
It's if you're part of the Togetherness Heals Facebook communities, typically on the day of the Zooms, they'll post a reminder and then a link to it. So you have to be a member of those private groups to have access to it because they want to keep it, safe and secure so people who are in the group feel safe and can be vulnerable. But then there's a link on there. And it gets really confusing for those of us in the central time zone because it's all of them are posted in Eastern because they're on the East Coast. I'm sorry.
Yep.
And so, on Wednesdays, every other Wednesdays, it's Central Time, which is what I relate to, is from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And the opposite Wednesday is the Healing Hearts community does a Zoom, and theirs is a little bit later. I can't quote exactly the time, but it's a little bit later. I think it's 7:30 my time. And then on Saturdays, I think it's at 1 or 2 o'clock Central Time. I'd have to look, but I can get you that. But if they are part of the group, they can search within their Togetherness Heals for Zooms. If they're not seeing them pop up, they'll find them in there, or they can message me as well.
Good to know. Okay, so be aware of the time
Yes.
for the Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, I'll link up or at least mention Togetherness Heals as a potential Facebook group to join. I'm on it. I love it.
Yes. Yes.
I love it. Well, thank you for your service. You do a lot.
Thank
You
you.
do a lot for our community, Stacy.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
I appreciate that.
Well, let's get into your story. I would like to hear about your family of origin. So, who was in your raising family, and a little bit about what your childhood was like.
Sure. So I was born in 1972. I am the oldest of three girls. My mom at the time I was born was 21. And I say this because my mom was single when she had me. And being a single mother in 1970s, 60s, 50s, 80s was really frowned upon. And I know that there was a lot of shame around that. And my grandparents, according to my mother, told her she should have an abortion. And obviously she didn't. And so I was the oldest, a single mother, and I was a couple of years old, and my mom married her first husband, so my first stepfather, and they had my sister a few years later. So there were two of us girls, and I say this because from the time I now know, I don't have many childhood memories because of some trauma, but since he was in my mom's life, I knew him as my dad. I called him dad. He was my dad. They divorced in 1979. So I was about 6 or 7 years old when they divorced. And both my mom and my first stepfather remarried. And I thought I was one of the luckiest kids because at that time, it wasn't a popular thing to be from a divorced family. But what I thought was lucky about it is my mom and stepdad and who I thought was my dad and his new wife ended up being really good friends. So we would do things together. So I had these four adults in my life and I really enjoyed having all four of them together. So it didn't feel as traumatic, as it could have been. And I remember, okay, so my mom and her second husband had then my youngest sister. And so there were three of us girls. And from me, the oldest, to my youngest sister, there's a 10 years difference. And we were over at my quote unquote dad's house, my first not dad's house. And I remember finding their divorce papers, and there were some papers about child support. And my name wasn't on these papers, but my middle sister's name was. And I remember asking at their house, I can picture it. Again, I don't have many memories before that, but I picture this day. And I asked in front of everybody, because I didn't think anything of it, of course, as a young child. And by this point, I was about 10 or 11. I asked how come dad wasn't paying child support for me, which you think about a 10 or 11-year-old even knowing how to ask those questions. And that was the first time my mom told me that my dad wasn't my dad. And the I remember a lot of feelings around it and the shock. And simultaneously, my mom told me, but don't worry about it. Your dad on your birth certificate never wanted anything to do with you. So it's okay. Don't worry about it. And in my little 10, 11-year-old mind, I remember being obsessed with needing to know who this person was. So then you continue, through life and in childhood. And my mom had a messy divorce from her second husband. And as the oldest of three girls, I was really more of a mother to my younger sisters and raising them. And it was just a really tough non-childhood, I would say. I don't remember ever feeling like I was a kid. I was taking care of things and feedings and making sure my mom was okay and, all of those things. And so, and then as I became an older teen, I remember back then we had phone books and telephones without caller ID. And I remember finding we now know as my birth certificate father, finding his name and phone number in the phone book because he lived in the next town over. And I'd call him and hang up. And then when I got a boyfriend, we would drive by his house and keep driving. And so that curiosity was always great there. But also, anytime I'd bring it up to my mom, she would always remind me, don't worry, he didn't want anything to do with you anyway. Why do you ask? All of those things. And so I grew up. I got married shortly, a couple of years out of high school, had my first child, and I was 22. So I was a young mother. And I was very much, because I didn't have a quote unquote dad in my life, I was very much a people pleaser and a regulator of my mom's moods. And, I remember having my son, and I remember thinking, well, why would I want somebody in my life who could walk away from a child? And that was pivotal for me because I stopped obsessing over him. And so I grew up, raised a family. I had a second child a couple of years later. And as anyone who's listened to my podcast can, even from the trailer of my podcast, knows that there's some other issues, I like to say. And so as my kids were growing up, I realized that my mom was toxic, and I really separated myself from her. But she was for a while a much better grandmother than she was a mother, and so she was in our lives. And I think about a year or two before I did DNA, I bought my daughter, who she was, in college. She wanted a 23andMe test. So I bought her a 23andMe test for Christmas one year. And she was really bored with the results because, she knew who her mom and her dad was. There were no surprises. And that was that. And then fast forward a couple of years, my husband suggested that I do a DNA test because I knew that my birth certificate father had other children. And he said, don't you think it's time that they knew about you? And I kind of went back and forth, unsure of what I wanted to do. And, and at this point, I also should add, I grew up with two half sisters. We all knew that we were half siblings once I found out that my mom's first husband wasn't my dad. And so I knew that they were my half siblings. And then it really kind of like, well, they're sisters. Maybe I should let them know. And maybe they'd want to know me and, all of those things. And so reluctantly, at the urging of my husband, I did the DNA test. I did 23andMe. And then about a month later, I did Ancestry. And, as I say this out loud, I really don't know why I decided to do both, other than my husband's like, oh, let's just get it all covered kind of a thing. And then with the 23andMe, you can do the medical side. And so I did that because I didn't know that second half of my medical history. And having children, it was really important to me. And as I was aging, I wanted to know it. And so we did that for that reason, but then also ancestry. And I know now that what I didn't know then is that, ancestry has a bigger grouping of people who are testing. And so you're better to do it ancestry from a quantity side wise, whereas 23andMe is great for the medical side. But so we did that. And I got my ancestry results back on October 1st of 2019. And I wrote this stuff down because I had to in the craziness of what was going on. I recognized I needed to take notes. Otherwise, it was all going to become a blur. And at the time, I wasn't a journaler. I didn't write much. That has changed a lot through my journey. But I had to write down dates to make sure I kept track of. And now when I'm going through them, preparing for our conversation, it's crazy to me how fast things moved once I found out my results. And I don't recommend it for anybody to move fast because I think you need time. But I also know how I am. And once I get my mind set on something, I will not settle until I have answers. And so that all kicked in. And I'm not patient. My husband will tell you I am not patient at all. I don't have time to wait for answers. I'm going to find them myself. So I got my results on October 1st. And what's interesting about my story is I had a close match, but it was a first cousin. And I had reached out to this first cousin. And my mom and my aunt on my mother's side is all. So I know my two cousins on my mom's side. And of course, on my father's side, or my birth certificate side, I didn't know any of them. But this name popped up. And eventually I realized it was on my maternal side. And I'm like, this is who is this? Right. And so I messaged this gentleman. And it turns out he had also messaged my daughter. But my daughter, being a couple generations removed, could have cared less that she had an unknown second cousin, right? So she was not invested. And so he and I were communicating. Long story short, I learned that my maternal grandmother had a child before she had my mom, who's the oldest, and gave him up for adoption. And so this was the child of this unknown uncle of mine. And fast forward, I now know he's actually a full cousin. It was my grandma and grandpa before they were married, had a child. And back in the day, that was even more frowned upon. They gave him up for adoption and nobody knew about it. So I reached out to my mom and I'm like, Mom, you are not going to believe this. I did a DNA test and I found, and I don't even know if I could finish what I was saying. And my mom said to me, please tell me you did not do a DNA test. And I said, yeah, why? No, please. I saw Casey my daughter, open up her DNA test. I was praying that you would not do one. And I'm like, why? Tell me. She goes, nope, I'm not going to tell you. I said, Mom, you need to tell me. And she said, nope, I'm going to leave a note in my will. And so when I die, you'll know. And if anybody knew me back then, I would never speak up to my mom. I would never be firm with my mom. And I got very firm and I said, no, do not do that to me. You need to tell me. And she told me that I will not like her. I will be very upset with her, but the man on my birth certificate is not my father. So for the second time, hence why I am a double NPE, I found out that the man listed on my birth certificate was not my biological father. And I do give my mom a lot of credit because she gave me his name. And I say that because had she not given me his name, I don't know that I ever would have solved who my father was. because one odd thing about my story is my maiden name, or my mother's maiden name, which I was given when I was born because she obviously wasn't married, is, and I'll say it, is Porter. And my biological father's last name is also Porter. So for someone like me who has no knowledge about DNA, centimorgans, all of that, if that name would have popped up, absolutely, without a doubt, would have been on my maternal side, right?
Oh,
Because that's all I
yeah.
would have known as my name. So when she gave me his name and his last name was the same, I said, "Oh my God, Mom, was he a cousin?" And she's like, "I never even thought of that." I called bullshit. Excuse me. I call bullshit because you're sleeping with a man with the same name as yours and you didn't think to even question it, second guess, like, are we related? I don't know. Anyway, so I am very grateful that she gave me his name. I wrote down what she told me. I was in shock because remember, I called her to tell her she had an unknown brother out there. And so I hung up from her as quickly as I felt was right. Like when I got as much information as I could, I needed to go because I then needed to Google. Thank God for Google. And I remember it like it was yesterday. This split second that little girl in me said, "Oh my God, maybe I have a dad who wants me." So I Google his name, and the first thing that popped up was his obituary.
Mm.
And so it felt like I just gave myself goosebumps again. It felt like once again, the world fell out from underneath me. Like literally this split moment of excitement and anticipation that I have a dad who would want me maybe, to he's now dead and I'll never know him and he'll never know me. And then it began. And like my mind is spinning right now. Like, where do I start? Because, of course, the investigative side of us and what we're very fortunate in our current lifetimes is Facebook and Google, and you can find out a lot of information. And so from his obituary, I, of course, looked up his widow, his children, and what now when I say it out loud, it was like, duh, you knew. But at the time, I didn't understand it. His children had a different last name, and I couldn't understand why. I found him on Facebook, the three children, and I Facebook messaged the daughter. There's two boys and a girl. And I thought, okay, I'm going to connect first with the daughter. It makes sense. And I remember sitting on the couch waiting for that little face to pop up that they read it, that she had read it. And I sat there. And by this point, my husband was gone. He was on the road. And I was by myself sitting on the couch for hours, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it never did. And I said, all right, if she doesn't read this in the next hour, I'm sending one to one of the brothers. And so eventually I sent one to the brother. And fortunately, his wife, other reasons, monitors his Facebook messages. And I didn't care, whatever. And so she gave it to her husband and he responded to me. And as all of us NP knows, he inundated me with questions because of course everybody thinks it's a scam. It's, everybody has bad intentions. And so, how old are you? What's your name? Where do you live? And I responded and I said, here's my name. I was born, in 72 in southern Minnesota. According to my mom, your dad was in town. He was building drive-in movie theaters. And I said, I don't think he knew about me. And he asked for a picture. And so I, of course, answered all of his questions. And two things that he said to me in that moment changed my trajectory. Like it changed who I became because he said, one, I don't need a DNA test to know that he is your father. You look exactly like him. And secondly, I assure you, he didn't know about you, because had he, you would have been in our lives. And so, I say this as I didn't realize that's what I wanted to hear, but it changed, from this little girl who was always told her dad didn't want her to assuring me that he would have wanted me. The reason why the names are different is he had been told his entire life he couldn't have children, and that's all he ever wanted was children. So he married a woman who had two. When he met her, she was pregnant with her third child. She left an abusive marriage, and he raised these three children as his own. And I think why it hurts even more is this man wanted children so badly that he took on a ready-made family in order to have children, as so many men do now. And, even now saying it out loud, it takes my mind, all the what ifs. But yeah, he had passed away in 2007. And I learned my discovery in 2019. And so he had been gone for 12 years. He had died at the age of 63 of early onset Alzheimer's. So, which is concerning,
Wow, yeah.
from a medical standpoint. And yeah. And so I say this because shortly thereafter, so I found out his name on October 1st. My first Facebook message was the 20th of October. So I'm impressed. I waited 19 days. She didn't answer. So the next day I reached out to one of the brothers, and then that's when the conversation started. They agreed they needed to talk to their mother and they would get back to me, and surprised me because they went to go visit. And then they called me from her house on speaker. And I, quote unquote, met her on the phone. And then even saying this is so out of my norm. So 2 months later, on Christmas of 2019, my husband and I flew down. They live in Southern Illinois. We flew down and had Christmas with these strangers.
Wow.
I met, so they would be my step siblings, my stepmother, their children, their grandchildren, overwhelming and a lot. Again, 2 months in, I don't know that I would do it the same, but, and then September of the next year, okay, so let me back up. So that was Christmas of 2019. And a small town, Southern Illinois, the Step family, my dad had a sister, and she was still alive, her and her husband, and then my cousins, 4 cousins. They didn't know anything about me either. And the Step family did not have a very good relationship with them. And so they didn't share the information. And of course, somebody new in the family, I had no idea what the dynamics were. I had no idea on the history. I didn't know any of that. But I was hanging on to anything I could get from them, information and communication and all of that. And so I just went with their flow. And so after Christmas, we got home, and it was a couple months later, I got a phone call from what would be my first cousin. And she said, I hear you might be my uncle's child, kind of a thing. And I said, yeah, yep, I think that's true. And, my mom, so my aunt, didn't believe it because, again, he couldn't have children, they thought. And so in true NPE fashion, I said, no, I understand. If I send you, DNA kits, will you take them? And then we'll go from there. And yep, so I sent out to my aunt and to cousin's child a DNA test so they could take the test. And as you know, that weight is painful.
Yes.
And finally got the results back. And I wouldn't let myself, because my dad is deceased, I couldn't test him. These are his stepchildren. I couldn't test them. And there was always that little doubt in my head, like, what if my mom lied again? So the results came in and showed that my dad's sister was my aunt. and her grandson was my cousin. And the minute that she got the results, she reached out and said, "When can we meet you?"
Mm.
In September of that year, so September of 20, midst of COVID and all of that good stuff, we drove down, and my son came with me that time, and I met my aunt and uncle and their 4 kids and their kids and their kids' kids and the neighbors. I swear to God, it was this overwhelming for this shy, introverted girl. It was overwhelming. And my adult son, who has a good relationship with his grandpa and a okay relationship with his grandma, respects them. And so I felt torn because they wanted me to stand up and tell the whole family my story. But I was worried about my son feeling a certain way. I didn't want to disrespect my mother for my son's sake, right? And so,
Yeah.
but then I thought, you know what? He's grown. He and I have a great relationship, all of those things. And so I told my story and to the best of what I knew from my mom. And, I didn't bash her. And coming from the childhood that I came from, the best thing that I can say is this aunt welcomed me in and loved me the closest that I can describe or understand unconditional love that I'd ever felt. I felt more comfortable with her than I did with my raised family. And it was both ways. I adored my aunt. I talked to her on the phone frequently. I went down there frequently. I built this relationship with my aunt, who was the closest thing I had to my dad. And I treasured every second with her. And she shared hundreds of pictures with me and shared her opinion of my mother and how she disliked my mother because my dad nothing would have made my dad happier than to have known he had a child. And unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years later, and it was devastating. It felt like losing my dad, the closest thing I had to my dad. And so I treasured every moment I had with her. They honored me with, being listed in her obituary and introduced to everybody. And as an NPE anyway, you have all these emotions that pop up. And I'm at this funeral of my aunt, who I'd only known for a couple of years. And I'm being introduced to all of these amazing people. And then you sit back. I remember sitting back in the funeral home and crying because it really pissed me off that I had to be introduced to all of these people. These people should have all been a part of my life from the beginning, right? And so you have all of these mixed bags of feelings and emotions and loss, not beyond her, but the loss of the relationship with my cousins. I've got the youngest of my cousins is only 2 years older than me. And so we talk about, oh God, had we grown up together, we would have done this. And so it's all this loss. And yeah, it was just, it's so hard to explain. And I was there by myself. My husband couldn't come. And so I'd go out in the back of the building and call him for support. And nobody in that room could understand these feelings I was feeling because they were just happy I was there. But yet they didn't realize the mix of emotions and, all of these things. And nobody can write a book to tell you how to react in a situation like this. And so, yeah. And so since she has passed away, my daughter has met everybody. She's met us there, and she lived in Nashville. And so she would come up. And so they met both of my children, my husband. I go down at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. I'm pretty close with a few of my cousins. And I go to his gravesite multiple times when I'm there because, all of us handle grief differently. And honestly, I didn't know how to grieve leading up to this. I had no idea. You bottle it up and you tuck it away. That's how I dealt with grief. And so through therapy, I've really been working on how to handle grief. And for me, part of that is standing over his headstone and talking to him. And I always bring something to leave there for him, if it's a stone or if it's a, I've got an etched rock, that a big etched rock saying that's left there that, for the dad I always wanted and never knew, love your daughter, kind of a thing. And so the navigating, and I know there's a word for it and I can't think of what it is to navigate the grief of something you didn't have, and I'm 6 years in and I still struggle with it. I still can cry at the drop of a hat. And to imagine what life could have been, would have been, had I had a dad in my life. And, you hear a song or you see a movie or you see something for, my birth certificate father was never in my life. I had a stepfather for the first few years of my life, and then he was gone. I literally never spoke to him again. And my mom alienated me from anybody. And so there's all of these things that happen internally and trying to rewrite. And so for me, I've done a lot of therapy. I'll back up. After I found out my results, and I'll reference your interview on my podcast because they'll come out, not too far apart. But you sat down with your mother a couple of weeks later with a Post-it note with some questions for her. And I sat down face to face with my mom, October of 20. So a year later, because again, I live 4 hours apart. And so it was a good thing and a bad thing. But I drove back home and I sat down with her and I had a list of questions for her. And, and I won't go into all of those details, but I understand it's a tough place. I'm a mother. I have grown children. And I imagine if I were to sit down with my children and my children were to ask me some of the questions that my mom was asked, it would be tough. I found out my mom had slept with, in a relatively short period of time, 3 different men. Again, I pass zero judgment. She was single. They were single. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with that. And I made sure to tell her that. I'm happy for you. You were single. Do what you want to do. But growing up, my mom was very adamant about telling everybody she got pregnant with the first man she slept with. When in fact, she was sleeping with 3 men. And I know this because I'd reached out to another guy that she said worked with my dad, because as NPEs, we become really good PIs, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to learn as much as I could about my dad. And so I said, I reached out to a couple of guys that worked with him because I wanted to know him from that perspective. And I called this guy that my mom gave me his name. And he goes, "Oh, I thought you were calling me to say I was your dad." And I'm like, "Oh, well, that's embarrassing." No. He also didn't have any children, and he would have been happy if I was his daughter.
Oh, wow.
And so, I'm sitting across from my mom and I'm like, "Well, Mom, how did you pick my birth certificate father when you had these multiples?" And so when I say that, I wouldn't want my children asking me about my sex life when I was 20, 21, right? And so I understand that these were tough questions, but my mom, who I now know has narcissistic tendencies, couldn't own any of it. And had my mom at any point in this conversation with her said, "I am sorry. I picked the wrong man to put on your birth certificate and I'm sorry," I would be in a very different place than I am right now.
Yeah.
She couldn't say I'm sorry. She doesn't know how. And she was mad at me because I made her, quote unquote, relive all of this. And now, mind you, single, there was no harm done. It was all consensual. There was all of that. And so after her answering these questions for me, I left that meeting realizing, probably for the very first time, that I was never a priority for my mom. And I cut off contact for about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. I had to deal with myself. Like I I had to stop spinning myself. I couldn't deal with her childish behavior. I couldn't, whatever. And so that's when I listened to every podcast I could get my hands on. I eventually found the Zooms, and I giggle now because I'll host a Zoom a month. When I first found the Zoom, I didn't turn my camera on. I didn't turn my microphone. I just listened, and that's all I could do. It took me months to turn my camera on, and then months more to turn, and to speak. And so it was such a process. I started therapy because as we talked about, I knew my mom was going to die someday, and I didn't want regrets. And so I had to work through that. 5 years in, we finally started talking about that because I realized how much childhood trauma I had and the negative self-talk and all of these things going on in my head. And so eventually, after a lot of work, I'd see mom at family weddings and graduations and that type of thing. And it was cordial. It was as if I was meeting a new person at the grocery store, kind of a thing. And I read the book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, I think is the full title of it. And it changed my mindset that I realized, you know what? I'm never going to get from my mom what I want, what I need, what I deserved. And I either take it or leave it. And I figured out boundaries, and I now am limited contact on my terms. Like, I have very strong boundaries, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I will sit down with her. I just saw her in August, and we sat down. No, actually November. We sat down and had lunch with her and my stepdad and my husband and I, and it was cordial and it was fine. But I don't take the shit anymore. I shut her down when she's rude and disrespectful. She asks about my dad. And ironically, in August, when I was back home, many NPEs would die for what I received. I received a picture of my mom and my dad before I was born, my biological father and my together.
Really?
Yes. Yes. So I haven't decided what I'm going to do with this, but I will do something. I'm very much about memorials and something to see. And so I have this tiny little picture that I treasure, and I'll do something with it. But yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm still at with my mom. It's a text, Merry Christmas. It's a text, Happy Birthday, Happy Mother's Day. There's 0 gifts, 0 cards. You can't go to the store and buy a Happy Mother's Day to the mom who lied to me for 47 years. My husband jokes, or my therapist actually has said it too, that you should work for Hallmark and create cards that are needed for
yes. These strange circumstances.
Strange circumstances. Yeah. And so, and I'm comfortable with that. And I've come to terms that when she passes, I did, and I was a good daughter. And I should add, my 2 younger sisters haven't had a relationship with my mom in, my one sister probably 30 years, my other sister probably 10 years. And so I was the last one to have a relationship with her. And she doesn't try. She doesn't work at it. She doesn't need it, evidently. I don't know. I just think she's a sad, miserable woman.
That's very telling. All 3 of her children have no contact or limited contact.
No contact.
Okay.
No contact. Yeah. And yeah, there are no contacts. I am limited. Yeah. And so I think that's also helped give me permission that it's not me, it's her, kind of a thing. And I'm working on it. I'm working on me. She isn't. I know I'm not perfect. I know I could have done some things different. I could have said some things different, but I know I didn't do anything wrong to deserve to be lied to be treated, a certain way, whatever it might be. And so I take her for who she is. And yeah, it doesn't take the grief away, but it certainly, it's a healthy place for me with her. Yeah.
And what a beautiful little support system you've built for yourself with the groups, the retreats, the Zoom calls. It sounds like your husband is incredibly supportive as well.
Incredibly. I know that there's many people in our community who have struggles. They really, really struggle with supportive partners, and because they don't get it. Like, how could they? They don't know what it's like, but he knew the relationship and how much I needed a dad, and all of those things. And he has been so compassionate and empathetic, and supports all my time at retreats and Zooms and all of that. So yeah, it's absolutely made a huge difference for me and my healing and my therapy. I mean, he's been a huge supporter of that. He'll come with me sometimes as needed. I've done a lot of EMDR, and I've been very open with him along the way, so he understands when things happen, because he's known since the beginning when I describe my process with EMDR and my safe space and all of those. And so I think it's being, like you and I talked, it's being authentic, narrowing down where I spend my energy, who I give it to, has been crucial in my healing. Yeah.
And maybe your dogs. We were talking
Yes.
off the record about the dogs in your life, the kennel, and I was like, gosh, that's got to be healing as well.
It is. And, I never thought of it. I didn't grow up with dogs. My mom, we couldn't have dogs. My mom wouldn't allow it. And when I moved where I live now, and as I told you, we opened up a dog boarding facility, and the unconditional love from these dogs and the pure joy. My therapist, actually, she brought it up to me, and she's like, I don't think that's on accident. I think you sought out that unconditional love. Now, granted, it's from 4-legged critters versus, people in your life. But yeah, I think it's very therapeutic, for sure. Yeah,
Lovely.
Definitely. Yeah.
Stacy, if people wanted to know more about your story or get in touch with you, how would they do that?
They can either find me on Facebook, Stacy Porter Williams, and also my podcast, which I've shared my story. My husband actually interviewed me there for my story. And again, Mothers, Lies, and DNA Surprises. Otherwise, my email address is sandkey06@gmail.com.
I will link those down below. And Stacy, thank you so much. This has been so nice spending the day with you, doing both of our podcasts today. So thank you for coming on and sharing your story and where you're at today.
Thank you so much for your time and telling your story on my podcast. And I'm honored to be here on yours as well. Thank you for everything you've done. And you were a huge part of my healing early on in my discovery. So thank you.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.